Hi everyone, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live here from CES. We're going to talk about restaurants and what's happening in the restaurant industry. I'm Evert Gruyaert, I lead restaurant industry for Deloitte, and I'm here together with Ed Lee, my colleague and dear friend, who's leading up a whole team that is actually constantly working and thinking about what the future of restaurants entails. So CES must be like something you look forward to like every year, but the big show for you.
There is some really great stuff to see here at CES. And Ed, we've been walking the show floor and looking at different opportunities, looking for automation. AI is a big theme this year. Everything is sort of AI. It's almost like back to the dot-coms where everything is dot-com back then. Now it's AI. Spent some time looking at automation. Automation is very interesting in restaurants just because it tends to be kind of expensive, and certainly with restaurant companies having a hard time getting employees and high turnover, they're looking for ways to simplify the operations and automate pieces of it. And we see some interesting things, robots that can make coffee with your face in the foam at the top, or make you drinks in a bar. There's some interesting things out there. I don't know that they're entirely ready for prime time because they look a little bit expensive and maybe not all that reliable. But certainly a lot of action happening, and companies really trying to push the envelope.
Yeah, we spent now almost the entire week already here, right? So we're ready to go, but it is so inspiring just to walk around, to get a sense of like what is new, what is hot, what are all these companies really focused on, have conversations with them. For me, actually, one of the things that always fascinates me here is, for instance, what we have here behind us, like the car manufacturers, autonomous vehicles. We see drones literally like flying around here. And a few years ago, that was all, we always had the question of, is this going to be real? Is it really going to happen? Is it going to impact restaurants? But it's reality now. I mean, there are cities where we have autonomous vehicles, where we have drones actually delivering food from restaurants.
Right.
So it's actually really cool to start seeing these things really come to life.
Yeah, and you were talking with one of the autonomous car companies about how, hey, is there some way we can sort of modify this thing to be better at food delivery?
We talked about some of those use cases, right? It's like saying, hey, imagine today I land somewhere in an airport, I just get in my taxi or another provider. How can I maybe in the future think about using the app and say, hey, I want to have one of those autonomous vehicles pick me up already with my food. So it can go to the drive-thru, pick up my little brown bag, and I'm ready there,
Exactly.
That would be really, really fun. But restaurant companies are talking and thinking about that. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've spent a couple of years really thinking about, let's taking a step back and saying, where is the consumer going? Because it really does need to start with where the consumer is heading. And there's a lot of really cool technologies maybe looking for a use case, but starting from where the consumer is heading, what's happening? And there's some big unprecedented changes happening in the environment around restaurant companies. Obviously, the consumer is changing a lot. Everything else is grown. And so restaurant companies need to be thinking about what's going on with my consumer base. How are their tastes changing? Aging population, more single-person households. What does that mean for my menus and how I deliver food, how I offer service, and the experience that I'm bringing to bear? So those are some big changes, and that's going to have implications on what restaurant companies do. The second bit is certainly technology, and that's why we're here at the show. Is AI growing? Autonomy is growing. Data. I mean, how do we work my data and make sure that it's doing the things it needs to do for me? But the world outside is changing dramatically. And again, 25 years ago, we'd come to the show and we'd all talk about Moore's Law, where the power of computing is doubling every 18 months. AI is doubling every 3 months. And so what used to be 90 days ago, that's now totally obsolete, and you need to be thinking about the next thing. And so if that's happening, how might restaurant companies think about that? And further, there's a sort of convergence in technologies where, particularly between biotech and food tech, where perhaps your smartwatch is going to tell you what you should be eating for lunch today instead of you deciding on your own. And so that's going to have implications on restaurants too. And GLP-1 drugs being much bigger now, that's having implications. So much change is happening, massive implications on restaurants, and we're seeing a lot of it here play out today.
Yeah, and so you're talking about some of those driving forces and those trends on consumers more holistically, but it definitely resonates very well within the context of restaurants, right? Like we spent over the last few months a lot of time with executives in the restaurant industry, trying to really get a sense of like what's keeping them up at night, what are the risks, and I always try to be at least an optimistic person. But so what are the opportunities that we have in front of us? To build on all these trends. And some of the key things that they talk about is, hey, how do I grow in an environment that is as challenging as the one that we're operating in today? How do I make closer connections with my consumers to fuel that growth, right? That digital experience that is so important. Hey, I hear a lot about AI. I get use cases every single day. Right. What is really going to move the needle for me on how I run my restaurants, front of house, back of house, all those things. So based on what you've seen here this week and all the research that you have been doing, Ed, so what are some of the things that restaurants should consider thinking about and should be worried about today, or should really approach as an opportunity? Yeah,
sure. So look, the challenges of today are very much traffic. How do I get more people into my restaurant? And that could be through this, the traditional setup that you have. But what we want restaurant companies to consider is, given the changing demographics, given what's happening in the world around us, what are some of those new growth horizons that are going to drive new growth platforms for the future? So, for example, new formats, new sub-brands, new more Gen Z forward digitally native brands. And we see restaurant companies doing that today, experimenting with either a beverage-focused brand or a simpler brand that's sort of appealing to a younger consumer. I think some of those really interesting side things are fascinating. Food innovation, massive for sure. There's an explosion in beverage innovation right now. And so taking advantage of that, all of those are sort of new growth horizons. And then furthermore, thinking about expanding your geography. So building new units or expanding outside the US, lots of folks dabbling in this. The question is, should they be super intentional and making a big commitment to either expand domestically or internationally and finding those new platforms for growth? So for sure, getting more people through the current restaurant, but should I be adding more restaurants too and driving growth that way?
Yeah, and it is, when we talk about the risks and opportunities, what are some of the risks of that? What are some of the things that we need to be careful with?
I was reading somewhere where in 2024, with the year that just ended, that's terrific. If you're a consumer, there's always something cool and new to try. And the idea is, like, how do we think about making sure that we're being intentional with the kinds of things that we're doing? Who are we really targeting? And what are the real trends? And let's try to find new occasions and new opportunities to grab new consumer tastes and not just sort of throw things out there because it's news. Because that just makes it difficult on the operations, hard to deliver with good service. So restaurant companies should be cautious about just doing it for the sake of doing it.
So new ways of growth. Got it. What's the next one?
So you mentioned it just a moment ago, and that is building a deeper connection with consumers, as well as just offering a much better experience. Convenience has always been king, and that continues to be the case. But the bar is really raising for what is convenient, and it will continue to rise as some of these technologies come into the forefront. So, if we think about this convenience bit, the idea where you can have a very personalized experience where you come into the restaurant and they know who you are and you're greeted by name. Maybe you're even greeted by name by an AI robot in the drive-thru. Mm-hmm. People love to be greeted by name. So you have that much more personal touch that you can enable through technology. Particularly the next generation, they just want everything to be as easy as my phone. So how can I make the experience in a physical space as easy as pushing one button in my phone in the digital space? And so restaurant companies should be thinking about, how can I take some of these technologies and even make the experience in a sit-down restaurant that way, where the server has your name, has your favorites. Hey, would you like another one of those? That's, because that's what you order more often. So really thinking through how to make that personalized touch. And then building a connection. So loyalty programs are abounding, people are trying things, but they're pretty much just rewards programs. If you turn up, you get points, you get free food. If we look around at other industries, airlines and hotels and credit cards, those rewards are much more deep and much more meaningful and build a stronger connection. So restaurant companies have an opportunity there to think about their rewards programs or think about their loyalty programs, such as really building connections as opposed to just, okay, well, here's some free food after you visit so many times. So that's a huge opportunity for restaurants as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And then let's start digging into AI, because
Right.
it is almost impossible to go to any session
Yes, that's
here
right.
or talk with any of the vendors and not talk about AI. So what does it really mean
Yeah.
for the restaurant?
Yeah.
Where are those opportunities?
Yeah, I think there are two components to this. So one of them is about efficiency and effectiveness. And so using AI to take burden off of the staff, using Gen AI to just do things that you might have had folks do before. There's a whole world of agentic AI. The show is 2025 is the year of agentic AI, and that would be okay. Well, I'm just going to ask my agent, AI agent, to make me a reservation for me and my wife this weekend for dinner, knowing what kinds of restaurants I like and foods that I like and so forth, and when I'm going to be available because it has access to my calendar. So those kinds of things I think are going to start to come to the forefront. But in a real day-to-day perspective, it's finding ways, say, in the kitchen, to leverage data and AI to help your employees know what is the next best thing that I should be doing, as opposed to just scrambling, and then leveraging that for maybe some automation. I mentioned earlier, like, fully fledged autonomous robots in a kitchen probably not ready to go, but there are lots of tasks in a modern restaurant kitchen that are not so easy and are a bit of a grind. Think about prepping, chopping tomatoes, this kind of thing. There's opportunity there to leverage automation to take some of those less desirable tasks off the plate of your employees and enable them to offer a higher level of service for the things that matter the most to a consumer.
Yeah, and just to build on that, when you talk about some of those more cases around the robotics, etc., I think one of the realities too, when I talk with some of the vendors, is like you start seeing that the cost really for these kind of applications is going significantly down, right?
That's
because
right.
that was a hurdle for many years. Technology is
Yeah.
not necessarily new. It was a hurdle from, hey, if I scale this across all my restaurants, it's going to cost me a lot of money. So that's going down. So do you think that will help with the acceleration?
I think
of
so.
scaling
I
those
mean,
solutions?
the thing that happens in technology is it will, first of all, it gets smaller, okay? And it gets less expensive over time. And so what restaurant companies can be considering is, how do I get on the train here? Something that's meaningful to me, meaningful to my consumers, but how do I start working with it so that over time I can take advantage of it as the costs come down? I mentioned this coffee making robot earlier today. Several generations ago, 6 or 8 years ago, the thing was the size of a house. Now they're sort of on the tabletop and really able to do things. So, and that's 4 or 5 generations of improvement that we're seeing. And so, but getting started, you're not going to put very, very expensive things in every restaurant. But getting started to really understand it and working with the suppliers to reduce the cost and really shape that the way you want it is an opportunity for a lot of restaurant companies.
Yeah. Okay, so AI, what's next? What's the next one on the list?
Okay, so the next one on the list is related to all of this technology bit, which is preparing your workforce for the future. So, with all of this change, so there's a huge amount of consumer change we mentioned. There's a bunch of personalization and connection with consumers, which is a very different way of doing marketing than we saw in the past. Okay, now we have all these different formats or concepts that we're launching. There's a lot of different skill sets that are going to be needed. It's not just sort of the one way that we do things around here. And that's going to have implications on restaurant companies' employees. And so helping them to think through, okay, how do we first think about upskilling, okay? And hey, my marketers actually don't know how to do the marketing that they need to be doing in the future. How do I make sure that I can drive their skills up in a way that they can take full advantage, not just participate, but potentially even lead? And then for the employees in the restaurants, actually, as it turns out, life is going to be getting a little bit easier if the unpleasant tasks are automated and so on. But boy, with all this technology in the restaurant, you need sort of different people in there. You need different ways to service those restaurants, maintenance, and so on. And the employees in there need to be a little bit more savvy because they're working with technology every day, not just sort of cooking food. And so restaurant companies should really start thinking about, okay, what is it going to mean to me? What are the kinds of things I need to do? That's really important. And then there's sort of basics, like a lot of AI that we've seen around here can help with automating scheduling and automating task listing and so on. And so there's ways to even make life more pleasant for the workforce, which is difficult because look, restaurants have high turnover, and so leveraging some of this technology to make life easier for the employees is a huge opportunity.
And I think it is a space where absolutely we hear there's a lot of interest, right? Because we know that, especially in the US, there's a lot of pressure on wages for employees.
For sure.
So so there is executives are trying to look for new ways to automate more, to drive some additional efficiency.
Yeah, for sure.
In the restaurants.
And getting by with less. And so, to the extent that folks can take advantage of that, and it's not going to overnight solve the turnover problem, but boy, oh boy, it's going to be much easier to retain people in restaurants as opposed to going to some other role if working in restaurants is a much more pleasant experience.
Yeah. Okay, so the final one. What's on your list?
Yeah, so the last thing, and again, it's just a little bit over the horizon. It has to do with sustainability and the planet. And look, in consumer food, so food you go buy in the grocery store, they've been thinking about this a lot longer, all right? Because if you go to the grocery store, there's individually packaged things. There's lots of packaging in a grocery store. And if you order something on Amazon, there's tons of packaging involved. And in restaurants, we haven't had that. So they've had to think about waste and recycling and packaging in a way for decades that restaurant companies hadn't had to think about. But it's coming now because the next generation of consumers is much more interested in this. And I think there is opportunity for restaurant companies actually to have that help them in their operations. So look for waste in the operations, try to reduce that waste, whether that's food waste. Energy is another huge area where you can do some interesting things to reduce energy consumption. But it's kind of getting on that train because this thing is coming. And much like we see it play out in consumer food, it will start to play out that way in restaurant land as well. And so it's probably not the thing that's staring at everybody in the face here in 2025, but thinking through what are those opportunities to do better while still making more money is an opportunity for folks to start thinking about.
For sure. Let's wrap this up, Ed, by looking forward, right? We just started the new year, right? We're all making our resolutions and our wish list. What do you wish the restaurant industry in 25?
Yeah, so there's a risk, and certainly if you spend a whole week at the show, there's certainly a risk that you run home and you start experimenting with tons of different things. And we've mentioned just now a ton of opportunities for people to have huge benefits from technology and new ways of thinking. But it's super important for restaurant companies to pause just for one moment and take a step back and say, look, there's 100 things I can do, of course, but actually I can't do all of those things. And if I've got my organization running around chasing the latest shiny thing, that's not great for everybody either. It turns out to be, in many cases, a waste of money. And so it's important for restaurant companies to take a step back and say, okay, where am I heading? Where's my brand going? Where are my consumers heading? How are my consumers actually changing based on the food that I'm offering and the service that I'm offering and the geographic location of where my stores are? And thinking through, okay, given all of that, what should be the key priorities? And of the 100 things I can do, what are the 10 things that I should really get started? It's not going to be all of it. What are the 10 things I should really get started with so that I'm on the train? I'm actually learning. You can't really learn by reading or going to a show. You got to actually do it. And so learning, getting the repetition, getting the reps in, and then improving as you go. And then, okay, what are those next things that happen after that? And what are the things that I can kind of push out until later? Because they're cool and everything, but they're not going to deliver the value to me right away. And so we spend a lot of time with restaurant companies doing just that. Sort of like, oh, there's so much, I'm overwhelmed. How do I think about prioritizing? And that's really an important next step, because then you've got this focus group of opportunities that you're chasing. You can put a lot more energy against and get a lot more from than spreading everything across the 100 or so pilots that you're trying to run in your restaurant. And so that's I think an important opportunity for restaurants in 2025 is to take that step back, soak in where the consumer's going, and all the opportunity that there is and start to focus.
So what I hear you saying is, don't just wait here for the future of restaurants.
Right.
Shape your own future.
Exactly.
Right?
Be intentional about it, because if you wait around, you're going to get passed by. Things are moving too quickly.
Right.
Your competitors are not waiting, and so they are going to pass you by if you sort of sit back and say, "Well, I'll be a fast follower." In the past, used to be I can wait a couple of years. Now it's like, okay, I can wait a few months. Well, this is nothing. And so thinking through how to get started, get good at it, learn, and make progress is the right thing. But you have to be super intentional.
This was a great, super insightful conversation as always with you, Ed. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for watching.